I shouldn't have read it, but the moment my eyes touched the first line, I felt something shift like the air itself had decided to hold its breath. The paper was heavier than it should have been, thick cream, stock the kind law firms use when they want everything to feel official, permanent, expensive. Read this document, and $2 million is yours. That's what the man at the desk had told me. No explanation, no small talk, just a pen slid across polished wood and a number that could change my entire life. $2 million. I remember thinking about my rent due in 3 days, the warning email from my student loan provider, the way my car had started making that clicking sound every time I turned the ignition. $2 million didn't feel real. It felt like a test, like someone was waiting for me to do something wrong. So I sat there in that cold glass office on the 42nd floor, overlooking a city that never noticed people like me, and I told myself it was just a document, just words, just ink on paper. I told myself I had nothing to lose. My name is Nia Carter, 26 years old, born and raised in Baltimore, now surviving in Manhattan on a salary that barely covered groceries and subway rides. I wasn't supposed to be here, not in a place like this where the chairs cost more than my monthly rent, and the receptionist didn't look up when I walked in, because people like me were invisible unless someone needed something from us. Go ahead, the man said again, his voice calm, practiced-like. He'd done this 100 times before. I nodded, even though my throat felt tight, and I lowered my eyes to the page. The first line was simple, just a date, August 14th, 15 years ago. Something about it made my chest tighten, but I couldn't explain why. I kept reading. The second line had a name. I wasn't expecting a name that didn't belong on a piece of paper handed to someone like me, Adrian Vale. I didn't say it out loud at first. I just stared at it, letting the letters settle in my mind like they were trying to unlock something buried deep. Then the door behind me opened, not loudly, not dramatically, just a soft click, but the entire room changed. I felt it before I saw him. The receptionist outside stopped typing. The man across from me straightened his posture, and suddenly the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was controlled. I turned slowly because something inside me told me I needed to. And there he was, Adrian Vale. He didn't look like the kind of man who needed to introduce himself. He didn't look like the kind of man who asked permission to enter a room. He just existed, and everything else adjusted around him. Tall, broad shoulders, dark tailored suit, the kind that fit like it was made for him. Alone, his eyes moved once across the room, calculating, measuring, and then they landed on me. And for a second, just 1 second, I forgot how to breathe. Read it, the man at the desk said again, softer this time, like he suddenly wasn't in charge anymore. So I did. I swallowed and forced the words past my lips steady enough that I surprised even myself. August 14th case, file sealed, under private authority, witness unaccounted for, status presumed lost. The moment I said the last word, something changed, not in the room, in him. Adrian Vale didn't move much, just a slight shift, a pause that most people wouldn't notice, but I did. His hand, which had been reaching for the back of a chair, stopped midair. His eyes sharpened, not at the paper, but at me, and then he spoke, low, controlled, but with something underneath it that didn't belong in a room like this. Where did you get that? I blinked because suddenly the $2 million didn't matter anymore. Suddenly none of this felt like an opportunity. It felt like a mistake. And the strangest part wasn't the question, it was the way he was looking at me, like I wasn't a stranger, like I was something he had lost a long time ago. And somehow, just found again. The question should have been simple, but it was not the kind of simple that let you breathe. Where did you get that? Adrian Vale repeated, and this time his voice dropped just enough that it felt like the rest of the room disappeared with it. I realized then that no one else mattered, not the man at the desk, not the glass walls, not the skyline stretching out behind me. It was just him and me and a piece of paper that suddenly felt dangerous in my hands. I swallowed, forcing myself to stay steady. You gave it to me, I said, because that was the truth, at least a part of it. I understood. His eyes did not leave mine, not even for a second. I did not give anything to you, he said quietly, and something in the way he said it made my pulse spike, not fear, exactly something sharper, like recognition, trying to surface where it did not belong. The man at the desk shifted in his seat. I could hear the faint creak of leather, like he was realizing he had stepped into something he did not control. Mr. Vale, this was part of the standard arrangement. The candidate reads the document, and if they agree to the terms, we proceed with the payment. Adrian did not look at him. There are no standard arrangements involving that file, he said, and the calm in his tone was worse than anger. It was precise, final, like a decision had already been made somewhere. I could not see. I glanced back down at the paper, like maybe I had missed something, like maybe the answer was right there between the lines. August 14th, witness, unaccounted for, status presumed, lost. The words pressed against my chest in a way I could not explain, like they belonged to me. But I did not remember why. I do not know what you think this is, I said slowly, choosing each word carefully, because something told me that mattered. I was told to read it, and that is what I did. If there is a mistake, then I can just leave. Leave. The word felt fragile the moment it left my mouth, because Adrian's gaze sharpened again, not angry, not aggressive, just focused in a way that made my skin warm, like standing too close to something powerful. No, he said, and it was not loud, it was not dramatic, but it landed heavier than anything else in the room. You are not leaving. My fingers tightened around the edge of the document, instinctively, not because I was trying to hold on to it, but because I needed something solid to ground me. You cannot just tell me that, I said, and I hated the slight shake in my voice, even though I kept it controlled. This is not your decision. For the first time, a faint shift crossed his expression, not a smile, not anything close, but something that suggested I'd said the wrong thing. Everything in this room is my decision, he replied, and there was no arrogance in it, just fact. The man at the desk cleared his throat nervously. Mr. Vale, perhaps we should reschedule or clarify the situation privately. Adrian ignored him completely, his attention still locked on me, like he was trying to solve something that did not make sense. Say the name again, he said. I blinked. What, the name you read? He clarified, softer now, but somehow more intense. My heartbeat picked up again, because suddenly it did not feel like a request, it felt like a test. Adrian Vale, I said. The moment the words left my mouth, the air shifted again, not visibly, not something anyone else would notice, but I felt it like a door opening somewhere inside a memory. I did not fully have. His jaw tightened, just slightly. And then he took one step closer, not enough to invade my space, but enough that I could feel the difference in the air between us. Look at me, he said. I already was, but something about the way he said it made me focus sharper, like the rest of the world blurred at the edges. I met his eyes fully, and for a second something flickered there, something that did not belong to a man who controlled rooms with a glance. It looked like recognition. It looked like disbelief. That is not possible, murmured more to himself than to me. But I heard it anyway, and I felt it too, that same impossible pull, like the past had just reached forward and touched the present, and neither of us knew what to do with it. For a moment, neither of us moved, and it was the kind of stillness that did not feel empty. It felt loaded, like something unseen had just shifted into place and was waiting to see what we would do next. I tightened my grip on the paper again, because it was the only thing that felt real. You are looking at me like you know me, I said before I could stop myself, and the words came out quieter than I intended, but they hung between us anyway. Adrian did not answer. Immediately, his eyes searching my face with a level of focus that made my chest tighten, like he was comparing what he saw to something stored somewhere deep in his memory. Tell me your name, he said finally. His tone had changed, not softer, not kinder, but more deliberate, like each word mattered more than it should. Nia Carter, I replied, and I held his gaze because something inside me refused to look away. He repeated it under his breath once, like he was testing it, like it was a key that might fit something broken. That is not the name, he said. I felt my stomach drop slightly. What does that even mean? That is my name, I said, and this time there was a sharper edge to my voice because I did not like where this was going. He took another step closer, not enough to threaten, but enough to narrow the space between us until I could feel the weight of his attention more clearly. Is the name you use now, he corrected, and there it was again, that strange certainty that did not belong in a conversation between strangers. The man at the desk shifted again, clearly uncomfortable now. Mr. Vale, I think there has been a misunderstanding. The candidate was sourced through standard recruitment channels. There is no prior connection here. Adrian turned his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge him, and for the first time I saw the difference between how he looked at me and how he looked at everyone else. There is always a connection, he said flatly, and whatever he meant by that made the room feel colder, even though the temperature had not changed. I let out a slow breath, trying to steady myself, because this was starting to feel less like an opportunity and more like something I had walked into without understanding. Look, I do not know what you think this is, but I am not whoever you are looking for, I said. I read the document. That is it. If you do not want me here, then I will leave, and we can pretend this never happened. I took a small step back this time, testing the space, testing the boundary. He noticed everything. His eyes flicked briefly to the paper still in my hand, and then back to my face. Read the last line again. He said. I hesitated because something about the way he said it made my pulse pick up again, but I looked down anyway, scanning the bottom of the page more carefully this time. There was a line I had not fully registered before, written smaller than the rest, almost like it had been added later. Identification marker, pending confirmation, subject exhibits recognition response upon exposure to primary name. My breath caught slightly as I read it out loud, slower this time. Subject exhibits recognition response upon exposure to primary name. The silence that followed felt different, heavier, like the room itself was reacting. Adrian did not move, but something in his expression shifted again. Not confusion, not exactly, but something closer to realization. You felt it, he said quietly, and it was not a question. I shook my head instinctively, even though I was not sure what I was denying. I do not know what you were talking about, I said, but my voice betrayed me just enough to make it clear that was not entirely true, because I had felt something when I said his name, something I could not explain, something that did not belong to logic or coincidence. He took one more step forward, closing the distance, just enough that I could see the details now, the faint lines at the edge of his eyes, the controlled tension in his jaw. You said my name like you remembered it, he said, and that was when it hit me. Not a memory, not a full picture, just a fragment, a feeling, a moment that did not belong to my life as I knew it, a younger version of myself, standing somewhere dark, hearing a voice say the same name, with urgency, with meaning, with something that mattered. My fingers loosened slightly on the paper as the thought slipped through. Before I could stop it, I have heard it before, I whispered, and the moment I said it, I knew everything had just changed. The words should not have felt dangerous, but they did the moment they left my mouth. I have heard it before, and I saw it happen in real time, the exact second something inside Adrian Vale locked in a place. Not confusion, not suspicion, certainty, the kind that does not ask for proof because it already knows. His hand dropped slowly to his side, like whatever he had been holding on to internally had just shifted. Where? He asked, and this time there was no command in his voice, no control, just something raw, or something that did not belong to a man who owned rooms. With a glance, I shook my head immediately because the truth was I did not know. Not really. It was not a memory I could reach for. It was a feeling, a fragment, a sound that had no clear beginning or end. I do not remember, I said, but even as I said it, I could feel the resistance in my own mind, like something was there just out of reach, something I had never questioned until now. Adrian studied me for a long second, and then something changed again, not in his expression, but in his approach, like he had made a decision. I was not part of. Close the file, he said to the man at the desk, without looking away from me. The man blinked, caught off guard. Sir, the agreement, the payment structure, we still need to finalize. Close it, Adrian repeated, and this time there was no room for discussion. The sound of a folder snapping shut echoed louder than it should have. A room like this, I felt in my chest like a door closing on something I did not understand. What are you doing? I asked, because suddenly the $2 million felt like it had never been real, like it had just been bait for something else. Adrian did not answer me right away. Instead, he reached forward slowly, not touching me, just taking the paper from my hand with a controlled precision that made my pulse spike again, not because I thought he would hurt me, but because everything about him felt intentional. He glanced down at the document once, and then folded it cleanly like it no longer held value. This was not meant for you, he said finally. I let out a short breath that almost sounded like a laugh, because nothing about that statement made sense. Then why was I the one reading it? I asked. He looked at me again, and this time there was something different in his eyes, something that made my chest tighten in a way I could not explain. Because someone wanted you to be found, he said. The words landed harder than anything else he had said so far, because they did not feel like a guess, they felt like truth, and I did not like what that implied. Found by who? I asked, but even as I said it, I realized I was not sure I wanted the answer. He did not respond immediately, his gaze shifting slightly past me for the first time, like he was considering something beyond the room, beyond this moment. 15 years ago, he said slowly, there was a file opened under my name, a case that should have ended with no witnesses, no loose ends, nothing that could resurface. He paused just enough that I felt the weight of what he was not saying, and then his eyes returned to mine, But it did not end cleanly. My stomach tightened because I knew without understanding how that whatever he was talking about was connected to me. I do not know anything about that. I said quickly because the idea of being tied to something from 15 years ago felt impossible. I was a kid. I was not even here. I grew up in Baltimore. I went to public school. I have records. I have a life that makes sense. The words came faster now because I needed them to anchor me to something real. Adrian listened without interrupting, and when I finished he nodded, once like he expected that response. That is what you were told, he said quietly, and there was again that subtle shift. The ground under everything I thought I knew about myself feeling just a little less stable. What does that mean? I asked, but my voice came out lower this time, less certain. He took a small step back, finally creating space between us, but it did not feel like distance. It felt like preparation. It means the life you remember might not be the life you started with. He said. I felt the air leave my lungs slowly because that sentence did not just question my past, it unraveled it piece by piece. And the worst part was I could not immediately prove him wrong. That is not possible, I whispered, but the conviction was not there, not fully, because somewhere deep inside me something was starting to move, something that had been quiet for too long, and Adrian saw it. He saw the hesitation, the doubt, the crack forming in the certainty I had built my entire identity on. You said you have heard my name before, he said softly. The question is not where, the question is why you were made to forget it. And just like that, the $2 million, the office, the city outside, all of it disappeared because suddenly I was not standing in a room anymore. I was standing at the edge of something much bigger, something I had never chosen. But that had been waiting for me. Anyway, the silence after his words did not feel quiet. It felt loud, like something inside my own head had started echoing too many questions at once. You were made to forget it. The sentence repeated itself over and over until I could not tell if it was his voice or mine. I took a step back this time, not to leave, but to breathe, because suddenly the room felt smaller, like the glass walls had moved closer without anyone noticing. That does not make any sense, I said. But even to my own ears, it sounded weaker than it should have, like I was trying to convince myself more than him. Adrian did not move. He did not rush to fill the space with more explanations. He just watched me. And that made it worse because it gave my thoughts room to spiral. People do not just forget entire parts of their life. I added quickly, that is not how memory works. He tilted his head slightly, like he was considering how much to say next. Memory works exactly how it is allowed to work, he replied, and there was something in that phrasing that made my chest tighten again, aloud by who I almost asked, but the answer felt like something I would not want to hear. I shook my head again, more firmly this time, trying to anchor myself to something real, something logical. I have records, I have school transcripts, medical history addresses. I have lived in the same place for years. You cannot just tell me that none of that is real. My voice was steady now, stronger, because I needed it to be. Adrian listened without interrupting again, and when I finished he gave a small nod, not dismissive, not agreeing, just acknowledging. I am not saying your life is not real, he said. I am saying it might not be complete. The distinction should not have mattered, but it did. It slipped under my defenses in a way I did not expect. Incomplete felt worse than false. Incomplete meant something was missing, and I had never even known to look for it. My fingers curled slightly at my sides as I tried to process that. Why would anyone do that? I asked quietly because that was the part that did not make sense to me. People did not just erase things for no reason. Adrian's gaze shifted for a brief second, like he was weighing something again. And then he answered, to protect you. The words landed softer than I expected, but they did not comfort me. They unsettled me even more from what I pressed. He held my gaze, and for a moment I thought he might not answer, but then he did. From knowing what you survived. The air left my lungs slowly because that sentence did not just suggest danger, it suggested history, something that had already happened, something I had lived through without remembering it. No, I said immediately because that was easier than accepting it. No, I would know. I would remember something like that. But even as I said it, a flicker passed through my mind, not a clear image, not a full memory, just a sensation, cold air, a distant sound, a feeling of being very small and very still. I froze for a second because it was gone as quickly as it came, but it had been there real enough to make my heartbeat pick up. Again, Adrian saw it. I knew he did because his expression shifted just slightly, like he had been waiting for that exact reaction. That is how it starts, he said quietly. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady myself, because I did not like where this was going. I did not like that part of me was starting to question things I had never questioned before, even if what you're saying is true. I said carefully, that still does not explain why I am here, why this document, why the money. I gestured slightly toward the desk, even though the folder had already been closed. Adrian's eyes followed the motion briefly and then returned to me. Because whoever arranged this knew two things, he said. They knew you would respond to the name, and they knew I would be here when you did. My stomach tightened again, because that meant this was not random, this was not coincidence, this was intentional. So this was not a job interview. I said slowly. He shook his head once. No. The single word settled heavily between us, and I felt something inside me shift again, not fear, not yet, but awareness, like I had just stepped into a situation that was much bigger. Then I understood. Then what is it? I asked. His gaze did not waver this time, not even for a second. It is a message, he said, and something in the way he said it made it clear that whatever message this was, it had nothing to do with money and everything to do with me. The word message stayed with me longer than anything else he had said, because it meant intent. It meant someone had planned this moment down to the smallest detail, and that realization settled into my chest like weight. I did not ask for a message from who I asked, but my voice had changed again, quieter, more careful, because I was starting to understand that the answers I was getting were not simple ones. Adrian did not respond right away, his gaze shifting slightly toward the glass walls, as if he was checking something beyond what I could see from someone who knows how to get my attention. He said finally, and the way he said it made it clear that was not something many people could do. I let out a slow breath, trying to piece it together, because none of this felt random anymore. Not the document, not the name, not even me being here. So they used me. I said, the words landing heavier than I expected, because I did not like how true they sounded. Adrian's eyes returned to mine immediately. No, he said firmly, they did not use you, they revealed you. The distinction hit differently this time, not like a correction, but like a warning, and I felt it settle somewhere deeper than logic. You keep saying things like that, like I am supposed to be something else. I said, like I am missing some version of myself that I have never even seen. My hands curled slightly again, because frustration was starting to mix with everything else, confusion, doubt, something sharper underneath it. Adrian did not step closer this time, but his presence still filled the space between us. You are not missing it, he said. It is still there. I shook my head immediately, because that was easier than considering the alternative. Then why do I not remember it? I asked, and there was a crack in my voice this time that I could not fully hide. He held my gaze, and for a moment something in his expression shifted, not softer, not exactly, but less controlled, like he was choosing his next words more carefully than before, because remembering it would change everything. He said quietly. The sentence settled into the silence around us, and I felt it echo inside me, because part of me already knew that was true, even if I did not know why. I looked down at my hands for a second, grounding myself in something real, something present, because everything else felt like it was slipping just slightly out of reach. You said 15 years ago something happened. I said slowly, something that did not end cleanly. He nodded once. Yes, and you think I was part of that. I continued. He did not hesitate this time. I know you were. The certainty in his voice should have made me push back harder, should have made me reject everything he was saying, but instead it did something else. It made the small fragment in my mind feel less like imagination and more like something real. Waiting to surface, I exhaled, slowly forcing myself to stay focused. Then tell me what it was, I said, because if he was going to unravel my past like this, I needed something more than vague answers. Adrian's gaze held mine for a long second, and then he stepped back just enough to create space, not distance, but clarity, like he was preparing to say something that mattered. There was a night, he began, a situation that involved people who do not leave loose, and people who make sure that anything connected to them disappears completely. He paused briefly, and I could feel the weight of what he was not saying again. But one detail did not disappear. He finished. You. The word landed in a way that made my chest tighten, because it was not said like an accusation. It was said like a fact I did not yet understand. And instead of that detail being resolved, he continued. It was hidden, erased from every place it could be found, and replaced with a version of your life that would never lead back to that night. I felt my heartbeat pick up again, because that explanation did not just suggest something had happened. It suggested it had been intentionally buried. That is not something people can just do. I said, but the argument felt weaker now, less certain, because I could not ignore the way everything was starting to align to precisely. Adrian's expression did not change. Not most people, he said, but the ones involved in that night were not most people. The room felt quieter again, heavier, like the truth was getting closer, even if I was not ready for it. So what now? I asked, because that was the only question that mattered at this point. He looked at me steadily, no hesitation, no uncertainty this time. Now, he said, we find out who decided it was time for you to remember. And something about the way he said remember instead of learn made it clear that whatever was coming next, it was not going to be new. It was going to be something I had carried all along without ever knowing it. The word remember did not feel like a possibility anymore. It felt like something inevitable, like standing at the edge of a door that had already started to open, whether I wanted it to or not. I let out a slow breath, trying to steady myself, but it did not work, not completely, because now every small sensation felt amplified. The sound of the city far below, the faint hum of the building, the weight of Adrian's gaze still fixed on me. And what if I do not want to remember? I asked quietly, because that question mattered more than anything else at this point. He did not answer immediately, and that pause told me everything I needed to know before he even spoke. It is not about what you want, he said finally, not harsh, not cold, just honest. And somehow that made it worse. I looked away for the first time since he had walked into the room, because I needed a second to think without feeling like I was being read. That is not fair, I said under my breath, but even as I said it, I knew fairness had nothing to do with whatever this was. Adrian moved then, not closer, not further, just enough that I could hear the shift in his steps across the floor. You think I wanted this to come back now, he said, and there was something different in his voice again, something I had not heard before, not control, not calculation, something closer to tension. If someone arranged this, they did not just bring you here, they brought everything connected to that night with you. I turned back to him slowly, because that part mattered more than I expected. Everything. I repeated. He nodded. Once people do not send messages like this without a reason, and they do not reveal something that was buried for 15 years unless they are prepared for what follows. The way he said follows made my chest tighten again, because it implied movement, consequence, something already in motion. So, what you are saying is that this is not over, I said. He held my gaze steady. This is the beginning. The words settled heavily between us, and I felt something inside me shift again, not fear, not panic, something sharper, more focused, like my instincts were catching up to what my mind was still trying to process. I looked down briefly at the closed folder on the desk, the one that had started all of this, and for a second I wished I had never opened it, that I had just walked away before any of this had a chance to unfold. But that thought passed quickly, because deep down I knew it would not have mattered. I would have been brought here one way or another. You said someone wanted you to find me, I said slowly. That means they know who I am now, even if I do not fully understand it yet. Adrian's expression did not change, but I saw the confirmation in his eyes. Yes, he said simply. Then why have they not come forward? I asked, because that was the part that did not make sense if this was a message. Then where was the sender? He exhaled slowly, not frustration, not impatience, just calculation. Because this was not meant to be delivered directly, he said. It was meant to create a reaction. I felt my pulse pick up again, because that made everything feel even more controlled, more deliberate. A reaction from you, I said. He shook his head. Once from both of us, the clarity of that answer landed in a way that made it impossible to ignore the pattern anymore. This was not about me alone. It was about the connection between us, whatever it had been, whatever it still was. So we were supposed to do something, I said quietly. We are already doing it, he replied, and there was no hesitation in his voice, now no uncertainty, just direction. I frowned slightly, trying to follow his meaning. By standing here talking, I asked. He gave a faint shake of his head by acknowledging it. He said, the moment you said my name and reacted to it, the moment I recognized you, as more than a coincidence, the message was received. I felt a chill run through me, not from fear, but from understanding, because that meant whoever had set this up had already succeeded. Then, what happens next? I asked, and this time my voice was steadier, more grounded, because I needed to be. Adrian stepped back fully now, creating space between us in a way that felt intentional, like the conversation had shifted into something else, something beyond just explanation. Next, he said, we wait The word should have felt passive, but it did not. It felt strategic, like waiting was not inactivity, it was preparation for what? I asked. He looked at me for a long second, and there was something in his eyes now that I could not fully name, something that felt almost like recognition, mixed with something deeper, something unresolved. For the person who decided you were ready to be remembered, he said, and for the first time since this began, I realized that whoever that person was, they were not just watching, they were expecting something from me, something I had not even begun to understand. Yet waiting should have felt like nothing, but it did not. It felt like standing in the middle of something already unfolding, like time itself had shifted direction, and I was just now catching up to it. I glanced toward the glass walls again, half expecting something to change outside, like the city would somehow reflect what was happening inside this room. But everything looked the same: cars moving, people walking, lights flickering on as the afternoon faded into evening, normal life continuing like nothing had changed. And yet everything had. I do not like this, I said quietly, more to myself than to him, but Adrian heard it anyway. You are not supposed to, he replied, and there was no edge to it, just fact. I exhaled slowly, trying to ground myself again, because the longer I stood here, the more it felt like I was drifting further away from the version of my life that had made sense this morning. So we just stand here and wait for someone to reveal themselves? I asked. He shook his head slightly. Not exactly, he said, and that small shift in his tone made my attention sharpen again. Then what? I pressed. Adrian's gaze moved past me briefly toward the desk where the closed folder still rested, like it was no longer just paper, but something active, something connected. We observe what changes, he said. I frowned slightly, because that was not the answer I expected. Changes where? I asked. He looked back at me. Everywhere, he said simply. The words settled in a way that made my chest tighten again, because it meant this was not contained to this room. It meant whatever had been set in motion was already affecting things beyond what I could see. That is too vague, I said, shaking my head. You're asking me to accept that my entire past might not be what I think it is, and now you are telling me to just watch for signs. Like this is some kind of puzzle. There was frustration in my voice, now sharper than before, because I needed something solid, something real. Adrian did not react to the tone. He just studied me for a second longer, like he was measuring how much I could handle. It is a puzzle, he said, but not one designed to confuse you, one designed to lead you. I let out a short breath that felt closer to disbelief than anything else. Lead me where? I asked. He did not answer immediately, and that pause told me again that whatever direction this was going, it was not simple. Back to the beginning, he said finally. The words landed in a way that made something inside me tighten again, because beginning did not feel like safety. It felt like something unfinished, something unresolved. I do not even know what the beginning is, I said quietly, and this time there was no frustration, just honesty, because that was the truth. Adrian's gaze softened just slightly, not in a way that removed the intensity, but in a way that acknowledged it. You will, he said, and something about the certainty in his voice made it hard to argue. Even if I wanted to, I looked down again at my hands, at the small details that had always felt like proof of who I was, the lines on my skin, the faint scar near my thumb, things that had always been part of me. And yet now, even those felt like they could hold something I had never questioned before. If someone wanted me to remember, I said slowly, then they must know what I'm supposed to remember. Adrian nodded once, yes, and they expect me to figure it out on my own. I continued. He tilted his head slightly, not entirely. He said. That caught my attention immediately. Then how? I asked, because that mattered more than anything else right now. He took a step toward the desk, reaching for the folder again, not hurried, not uncertain, just deliberate. He opened it this time, slowly flipping past the first page to something beneath, something that had not been visible before, because they left more than one piece. He said. My breath caught slightly as he turned the page toward me, and I saw it, a smaller note attached beneath the original document. Something I had not noticed before, a single line written in the same precise font as the rest, but this one felt different, more direct, more intentional. I leaned in slightly, reading it carefully. If she remembers the name, she will remember the place. The words settled into the air between us, and I felt it immediately, that same subtle shift, that same pull, like something deep in my mind had just been triggered again. Not a full memory, not yet, but closer this time, clearer, a flicker of something I could almost see. Adrian watched me closely, not speaking, not interrupting, just waiting. And for the first time since this began, I realized something else. This was not just about uncovering the past. It was about me facing it. And the moment I truly remembered whatever that place was, everything would change, not just for me, but for him too, because whatever connected us was not finished. It had just been waiting. The sentence should have been just words on a page, but it was not. It was a key, and I felt it the second I read it again, slower this time, like my mind was trying to catch up to something my body had already recognized. If she remembers the name, she will remember the place. My fingers tightened slightly against the edge of the desk as that word echoed inside me. Because this time the feeling did not fade. It stayed, not fully formed, not clear, but present, like standing at the edge of a memory that was just beginning to surface. Do you feel that? Adrian asked quietly, and I realized I had not said anything out loud. But he saw it anyway, the shift, the hesitation, the moment something inside me responded. I nodded once slowly because denying it now felt pointless. Yes, I admitted, my voice lower than before, more focused, because whatever this was, it was no longer abstract. It was happening. It is not clear, but it is there. I added. He did not move closer. He did not interrupt. He just watched, like he understood that whatever came next had to come from me. I closed my eyes for a second, not long, just enough to block out the room, the glass, the city, everything except the feeling. And that was when it changed. The fragment sharpened, slightly, not into a full image, but into something more. Defined a space, not a room exactly, but an environment, something open, something quiet. I inhaled slowly because it felt familiar in a way I could not explain. It is outside, I said before I even realized I was speaking. Adrian's attention sharpened immediately. Outside, where he asked, but his voice stayed controlled, careful, like he did not want to push too hard. I do not know, I said, shaking my head slightly. It is not a city. It is not like here. It is quieter, like somewhere away from everything. I paused because the feeling shifted again, adding another layer, another detail. There are trees, I said, and this time my voice carried more certainty. Tall ones close together, like they block out the light. Adrian did not react outwardly, but I saw it in his eyes, the recognition, the confirmation, like what I was describing matched something he already knew. Go on, he said softly. I swallowed because the memory was still incomplete, but it was building now, piece by piece, like something waking up after a long sleep. There's a structure, I continued. Not a house, not exactly, something smaller, older, maybe what I cannot see it clearly, but it is there. My heart was beating faster now, not from fear, but from the intensity of it, from the way each word felt like it was pulling more of the past into the present. Adrian stepped slightly closer this time, not enough to break the space, but enough that I could feel his focus more clearly in me. He said quietly. The question landed differently, not as a demand, but as something personal, something that mattered. I opened my eyes, slowly meeting his gaze again, because this part felt heavier than the rest. You are there, I said. The moment the words left my mouth, something shifted again, stronger this time, more defined, like the connection between us was not just an idea. It was real. It had been real before any of this started. Adrian's jaw tightened just slightly, and for the first time since I met him, I saw something that looked almost like relief mixed with something deeper, something unresolved. Then it is the same place, he said, more to himself than to me, but I heard it anyway. What place? I asked, because now that I had touched the edge of it, I needed to understand it fully. He held my gaze steady, and there was no hesitation in his voice this time, no distance, no calculation, just truth. The place you disappeared from, he said. The words settled into the space between us, and everything clicked, not into a full memory, not yet, but into understanding, into direction, because now it was not just a feeling, it was a destination, something real, something that existed somewhere beyond this room, beyond this city. So, is still there, I said slowly. He nodded once. Yes, and you know where it is, I added. He did not look away, not even for a second. I never forgot, he said. And something about the way he said it made it clear that whatever happened 15 years ago had never left him the way it had left me. It had stayed with him, shaped him, waited for this exact moment. And for the first time since this began, I realized something else. This was not just about remembering, it was about returning, because the place I was starting to see in my mind was not just part of my past. It was the one thing that connected everything, and the moment I stepped back into it, the truth would not just surface, it would demand to be faced.